Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hope your day is going well.
As well as can be expected.
All right.
It's the middle of the week.
I got you. I got you. What part of the country?
California, Los Angeles, LA
Oh.
County Department of Children and Family Services.
LA, California. Yeah.
Yes, and you?
I'm actually in South Florida. And
Okay.
Fort Lauderdale area.
Okay. Okay. And how is life in South Florida?
I describe it to people as that I happen to live in the Republic of Florida, not the state of Florida.
Okay.
I live in the Republic of Florida with all of its political challenges and
Yes.
just suppressive actions as it relates to African American people.
Yes.
So trying to maintain and navigate through this, but yeah. Hey, Angela, how are you?
Always pray for the safety of people of color in Florida, whether it's the Republic of Florida or Florida itself.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Very interesting. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, some endangered species. How do you pronounce your first name? Miss Edwards?
Ed Marine. One word. One word. Yeah. One word. Thank you.
Got it. Hey, Kirsten, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Good. We'll give it just a little bit time, about another minute or so. Got a couple of notes from a couple of folks that said that they either double booked or had a couple of other conflicts and may not be able to join. The invitation went out to everybody who was on the list who attended, but I know how people's schedules are and life gets in the way of life. But I'm glad to have you all here. And we'll just go ahead and get started. It's a small group, and we'll talk as long as you all want to continue to talk, and then within this hour period, and then we will hopefully I may be able to give you back some of your day. But good afternoon. I'm Keith Bostic, and I'm the president of the Black Administrators in Child Welfare, and I welcome you here to a follow-up conversation with painting the canvas, toward triumph through the lens of lived experts. This was a area of presentation at our annual conference on 9/21. And we said that because it was so rich and so inviting, we wanted to have a follow-up conversation with those who were interested. And once again, I just welcome you all to that, and thank you for your attendance. Good afternoon, Tiffany, and welcome.
Hello, everybody. Happy to be amongst you all. Looking forward to today's discussion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'll just kind of launch into it. I mean, during the workshop or the conference, you heard from lived experts who were talking about, or the challenge and the charge to each of them was to talk about what triumph would look like or could look like, or what the conditions would have, what conditions would look like in a space and a place for triumph for African American children, families, and communities engaged or involved or impacted by the child welfare system. And you heard many of those lived expert correspondents or individuals who happen to have lived expertise, a desire for, I guess, equity, a desire for being seen, a desire for being heard, requests for people's lens in these systems to change, to value the importance of the voice and the presence of those who have lived expertise. You heard various individuals speak about some of their experiences, and then also put forth a challenge to see, who would be willing to step forward to partner in that effort in many of the jurisdictions across this country. And we didn't end with a final artistic rendering, but it was the beginning of the canvas, as I'm calling it. And I think that each jurisdiction, will have to create their own canvas, but make sure that that canvas and that artistic rendering engages and involve those with lived expertise, and then also looking at the data about what impacts African-American children and families and communities, and then also about understanding that journey through some of the pain and the trauma that people have experienced. And so I kind of bring that to us as a jumping off place for us to have some further dialogue and conversation. And so since the conference, what have you thought about when we had that conversation around triumph and what that looks like? Did we get anywhere close to charting a path forward related to triumph? Did you have some second thoughts? Did you have some additional thoughts about what that might look like? So yeah, let's dig in there a little bit.
My initial thoughts, Keith, are I'm having some mixed feelings here due to the fact that when we are engaged in the conference, I mean, blowing it up, just to be real honest, folks are engaged. They're looking forward to hearing more. You hear the comments afterwards. I've heard about this conference since the day of the conference. And yes, and even up until a little bit later yesterday evening. And, we hear that, but I guess my concern is what is causing people to be so engaged and involved and so ready, seem to be ready and willing to look at ways to move this effort forward. But then they fall off really quickly when it's time to come back in these spaces to continue the discussion and further discuss ways to make that happen. My thoughts around triumph today for African-American families in child welfare is truly not in child welfare. I see that triumph as coming outside of child welfare. I have to say that I feel like child welfare was one more way to add to the oppression of African-American people. We all know it was never created for us. So how can we look at ways to truly eliminate child welfare involvement in our communities, in our families, in our people? I just wanted to put that out there in all my transparency. And yes, I work with states and jurisdictions around engagement because no, they're not there yet. But neither are we, you know, neither are we.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. Hold on a second, let some folks in. It's interesting that you brought up the issue of momentum and how, you know, there's this energy around, yes, rah rah, let's get to it. But sometimes the sustaining of the momentum, either the conversation or the commitment toward some possibility of change or some possibility of a journey to do things differently, sometimes wanes, and that's different for every system, every jurisdiction, et cetera. Some could be political, some could be just by virtue of the leadership, some could be just this is hard work. This is hard work. Welcome to those who have joined us. We just began. You are joining a group of individuals who are part of the follow-up conversation on painting the canvas toward triumph for African American children, families, and communities through the lens of lived expert correspondents and those who support and care about a new way forward. So welcome, welcome, welcome. We just had some opening conversations about, since the conference, what did you either wrestle with? What stuck out to you? Why did you actually return? What did you hear or didn't hear that you wanted to hear more of? And open it up. Anybody else? Thank you, Dr. Clark. Dr. Clark says she listened to it yesterday. Thank you so much. Ed Marine, not that I'm putting you on the spot, your thoughts or feedback from the conference and then to now, or things that you picked up there, or things that made you say, or.
You know, hello, Tiffany. I hope Tiffany's still on.
Yes.
Love you. Smiling real big the second he said your name.
Tiffany, I miss you. I need to see your face. I need you. You need to talk to me. But here's the only thing. Here's the only thing for me in regards to the conference last week. I enjoyed all the speakers and they made valid points. Yes, let's shake up the system, right? As how it pertains to African-American children, other children of color. I just do not want us to ever lose sight of child safety. There are some children, regardless whether they're African-American, Hispanic, Latino, Native American, that are severely abused and neglected. And I nowhere in the conference last week did I hear anything mentioned around keeping children safe. So we still have to ensure that that priority is in place. Yes, the goal is always, right, children who need to be a part of this system, they're the ones we really want to be in the system for their safety and to mitigate any risk to their physical body, their health, their minds, etc. So other than that, I thought last week it was exceptional. The speakers were on point, but my frustration was I didn't hear anyone speaking around, okay, yes, we want to either dismantle the child protection system, but we still have to ensure that children remain safe. And children cannot always remain safe with biological. Sometimes there needs to be a temporary separation, but we always have to ensure the goal is working towards reunification, right? But we know sometimes reunification does not happen. I do agree with the legal timeframes that we around reunification, right? Someone who's on substance didn't get on substance yesterday, so they're not going to get off substance use today, right? So realistically, 6 to 12 to 18 months, right, for a parent to get themselves together. How realistic really is that? So I agree that we have to take a look at that. But I just want to put that we need to ensure children are safe. And when I say safe, I'm talking about children who are, you know, the internal injuries, right? That we can't see the children who end up being murdered at the hands of a parent or, that mother's boyfriend, etc. We have to make sure we're that have a space as well when we're having these conversations.
I
Yes.
appreciate your comments, and I know that I can speak for myself that I would never want a child to be in a situation where they're unsafe. I'm not sure that any of us, especially those with lived experience, come from that lens. Also, I think when we talk about safety, I think we should be real clear about safety with parents, but also safety within child welfare, because a lot of our children are lost once they get into child welfare. They die, they're not safe, they're murdered, they're sometimes sex trafficked. And I think if we can look at working with the parent in the beginning to prevent that child coming into care, I think we'll have greater outcomes. I understand that the goal of child welfare work is to look look out for the safety and well-being of children. I firmly believe that a great part of a child's well-being is knowing that their parents are okay, and knowing that their parents are being engaged with in meaningful ways so that they can successfully bring them home without the risk of reentry into care.
Ms.
Yeah.
Braxton, I could not have said, I'm sorry, Keith, I could not have said that any better. I totally agree. Totally agree. I think as the years have gone by, right, since we have the development of a Child Protection Services Agency, again, if we were to go really back to the foundations of how we even got here, right, that they looked at immigrant children and they're trying to get those children off the streets, right, thinking that the work that they're doing, listening and looking at what their parents are doing, they're going to get into bad behavior, delinquency, etc. That's how child protection started. It started with society looking at immigrant children and how do we change and mold them so they can become moral and upright citizens. So somewhere along the way, yes, we have lost our way, but we have to be mindful that when it comes to safety, we really should be looking at safety as it relates to children who are, let's get back to the battered child syndrome, right? The children who are being severely sexually abused. I do agree, Ms. Braxton, that children do end up getting hurt, if not murdered as well in care. We've seen it, and I do agree with that as well. I just don't want us to lose sight of child safety play a role, right? Where it's egregious. That's the piece. So I do agree with the things that you shared, Ms. Braxton.
Right. So before I go to Tiffany, I just want to say a couple of things. One is I do think that, and thanks for elevating the piece that said that perhaps there was just this assumption around safety, but calling it out and pointing it out. I think that, at least from BACW and maybe many of the folks who were on the call, that we just believe that African-American children should be with families and or kin in their communities when safely possible. When safely possible. And if it's not safely possible, then all the other steps to ensure that children are safe, and that there are efforts to either enhance the area that is unsafe so that children can return in the appropriate amount of time. And so thanks for sharing that and bringing that up. And I think you said also around the history of the development of the child welfare system and what it was designed to do. Dr. Keisha in the chat talked about, but yeah, it was not built and designed with Black people in mind. And I'll let her come back and fill in the blank there. But Tiffany?
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with both and all of the powerful statements being made, right? And I think part of what I hear Ed Marine talking about, which I'm gonna hit you up, I'm about to send you my number in the chat. We're gonna connect. It's been too long. But part of what I think she was touching on was like this nucleus aspect of, right? So we had this dope I'm gonna go ahead and say this dope convening, right? Of all these phenomenal minds from around the country. And we were having these upstream conversations, right? And including lived experience in a way. And I kind of felt like it was implied, right? I kind of felt like this is more of what happens when we can create a space for just this topic. So in my mind, it didn't take away from that reality. But Ed Marine, not only do I agree with you 1,000% on that, that's the reality. I just didn't see that. Like that was the implied part of coming into the conversation. Like, since we all on the same page of this, now let's create a space to talk about these things that we normally don't get to talk about. But it doesn't take away from the fact that we did not express our core nucleus being. And I think that that's something to take moving forward, that it's always good to have that base and that foundation, that this is our ultimate mission, but today's conversation is about this, right? Which is what I see as what's transpiring. In agreement to everything that was shared from the reality of both sides. I'm living it right now, right? And I want to be vulnerable like I was in that instance, which is a little bit scary sometimes, but I think that's the reality that needs to like push the type of change that we're not looking for systematic change. Like we're changing minds and hearts and the culture. The system was never designed for us in the first place. Like I said, but the more that our families don't have to depend on this system, the more we're not a victim to it, the more people that we have in this network of professionals, that when you get somebody on the other end of the phone, which I did, Keith, a week later after the conference, that happens to be the supervising social worker that are holding your 3 nephews. Listen to me now. A week after the conference, and they ask you, did you speak at the conference? And you know you got somebody on the other end of the phone that it has the heart that you have. You understand what I mean? This is the other side of this work. That conference we all walked away with a little bit of a certification, right? Of like, if nothing else, we all agree that these children need to belong. So I had to live that in real time. And Marine and everybody else, we got a call on Thursday that my 3 nephews had been detained by DCFS, because the reality is even some of our closest relatives still have a long way to go and a lot of work to do. We as a family rallied up, because myself and all of my advocacy experience and the commission and all these different things, and my sister with her 20 years of experience as a relative caregiver, foster parent, were still on the other end of the phone being told that we were not getting those children for whatever reason. Because a social worker who was on her day off had made a discretionary decision, because the reality is, just like Emery said, sometimes it's not safe, right? And the things that my brother and his girlfriend is out here either doing or accusing each other of, I wouldn't want to put those kids nowhere near that myself. But I think there has to be that extra mile of investigation that says, okay, if not them, then who? Because they damn sure can't stay here. And that's where the world between what Ed Marine said and what Angela said, and that's my reality, is that the county ain't a safe place for them neither, right? But sometimes the parents aren't ready, right? And that's what we're talking about with my brother, who has a system impacted intellectual disability from all of the Ritalin and everything else that they put him on. That's now a 30-something-year-old man out here acting like he's a 16-year-old child, and his 20-something-year-old girlfriend, and all of her all of the issues that we've left our families to deal with in the cracks alone and on their own are resurfacing, right? And they're trying to touch the next generation. And you have individuals like myself and like my sister who are out here breaking these curses and who are working hard. Then we end up on the phone with people who sometimes don't get it. But then God will transfer you to somebody that'll say, Tiffany, did you speak at the Black Administrators for Child Welfare Conference last week? Right? And then all the red tape and then all the BS. And then when you tell that person, I'm not taking no for an answer, and they believe it to be true because they know you and know your heart and got to see your heart within those hours that they spent with you, that's what I think we're changing, right? We're not going to go solve child welfare. We're not going to change the hearts and minds of everybody. But we got 3 little boy children, not just little boys, BOYD. That means something. This system shall not have nobody else bearing my last name out of the system within 24 hours, right? And having them with family, as we give my brother and his girlfriend the 18-24, we'll give them a couple years if they need them, as much time as they need to get their lives together. But we gonna stand here with these kids. Nobody was looking at, with all the allegations and defense to the social worker, you had a social worker who was on her day off calling plays from the sideline with only the limited information she was given. And what was deemed appropriate at the time, before we got to making the calls and doing the things, was that because of all of that information and because it was so much and it was so complicated, she was just saying, for the weekend, we're just going to keep them while we figure this out. Not understanding, to Angela's point, they already scarred by then. The second y'all took them under whatever circumstances, they was already affected. These are 3 little boys under 3. They got the same blood in me that I got, which means they can do what I can do times 10. Do you understand what I mean? Like, so that for me runs deep. It runs personal. The things that I said and all my vulnerability were able to help me stand in a gap that exists for so many families that would have taken no for an answer, would have said, oh, the social worker's off, we can't do nothing today. Hold on, you got a boss and that boss got a boss. And then they got a boss. And I just so happen to sit next to their boss. If you want me to pull the commission hat out, I didn't even have to do none of that. Because before I had to present myself as a commissioner, I ran into another Black woman on the phone who heard me crying out as a Black woman, feeling unsupported, feeling like I'm standing in the gap for my family. I'm doing all this for this system, and I'm feeling overwhelmed, underpaid, and undersupported. And she stood there without ever being able to physically hold my hand and stood with my family. And by the time I got to the supervisor to explain it, she said, I believe in my whole heart that all of our children, especially our Black children, should always be with family. Let me get to the bottom of this, right? Let me talk to the social worker, ask her if she knows that the 2 people that you're inquiring about are not just certified, they're ready and able, right? So I say this to merge the worlds of those points and to answer the question to Keith of what has been the effect of the convening since the convening. How has this been on our hearts and on our minds? What has been the impact? Well, for one, it was a lot more LA people on the call than I realized. And I done ran into a couple of them. And then for 2, just what that did for me to somebody said something to me and checking in with me, because I did share a lot, and it was a lot that I was dealing with during the convening. And they asked me, was I okay? And was just checking in. And I said, sometimes, when they say, when you lose faith, the best thing to do is go to church. That morning I was losing faith. And we had church together in that convening. And that I'm standing on to this day of like, I've been recharged, I'm back in. And little did I know I was going to have to go 10 rounds. Could y'all imagine me putting in my resignation on Thursday and the following Thursday they calling me talking about they got all these kids? God knew. I did not know, but God knew. And that was important. And this is important. And even if we don't hit the mark 100%, and even if we do got to, work to make things better and greater, I ain't never been in a place to where people allowed me to come in, set the own tone of what I wanted to be called, how I wanted to be treated, allow me to have the conversation that was on my heart at the time, be received and be welcomed, and then still be welcome to come back on the back end. So I think sometimes that lip service piece is determining of whether or not the table disappears after the need goes away, right? And here Keith is still with this table, and whether 5 people show up or 25 people show up, sometimes less is more, and you get a chance to see that I think it's better to change lives than change a system, because each one of those lives is going to go change more lives, right? And the system is already its own thing. So I'm going to leave y'all with that of just tying a beautiful bow around the fact that this is not just impacting me as an advocate and as a professional, but like my 3 nephews, one of which whose birthday is today, turning 2 years old, are at home with us right now. And part of that contributing factor was somebody on the other end of the phone got a chance to get to know me, and all that came with it in that conversation, and was able to stand with my family in the reality that we all agree with, Ed Marine. Sometimes the family can't do it. The parents can't do it, but it should always be family first, and our children should never spend more time than they need to in the system.
Yeah. Well, Tiffany, thank you so much for your sharing. Thank you for your openness. Thank you for your grace. I too believe that it's going to require heart and mindset shift, and that is going to be the thing that will move people's will. The system can't change itself. We have to change or attempt to influence those who have those positional powers. And that I think you heard in the conference I said, I try to convince people to this work. I try to compel people to this work, and if that doesn't work, I try to convict people to this work. And it may require all 3 of those efforts. Your example showed up real time. The fact that you have children in with families, and that hopefully we can minimize the trauma. So thank you so much. I know I have Angela's hand, I have Ed Marine's hand, but I also wanted to give Dr. Clark an opportunity if she wanted to share anything.
Thank you so much for this rich discussion. I'm sorry I put some almonds in my mouth. So, thank you, Anne Marie. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly for your comments. So to kind of expound on what I had in the chat, I believe that what the young lady just finished saying, you know, about our children belong in our families. I don't think they ever belong in the system. And we have extensive family. We have two sides of our family. We have, if that's not enough, you know, we have people that are like family. But I just feel like the system was never, you know, designed with us in mind. Even its original intent had nothing to do with us. It's still not. It still operates that way. And I don't think at any point that children belong in our system. And so I think we just really have to do the exhaustive efforts of finding folks that might be even, I don't even know if it's, you know, if I want to call it finding, because folks are sometimes looking, you know, to be included, but we don't practice including these historically excluded people. Or there are, you know, we know barriers in the way that make no sense to having the children. Again, I think the young lady talked about on the conference how, or someone did talk about, you know, how we treat folks that are not family, right, strangers, and how we treat people that are known to the child, that loves the child and cares for the child. We have different standards, right? And so different barriers are there, and it's easier and seemingly better in the short term to place them in a system or in some stranger's home. But looking down that line, you know, that child, as we talked about, is not physically abused, their spirit, their mental health is being impacted. They're having identity crises. They're having, you know, cultural crises where they're just not connected. And so that short term, even that short term fix might be very enticing, but it's not effective. And I come as a professional in this space, but I was raised by my grandmother informally, you know, and, you know, had a 16-year-old mother who, you know, still battles with substance abuse. And I'm 42 years old, and she's still battling with it, right? And we're still navigating a very complex relationship. But I got to see the dysfunction and all of that kind of thing going on with, you know, my parents and stuff like that. But from the safety of my grandmother's grasp. And so you can still, even if family is whatever, you know, we're defining family to look like and act like and, you know, or whatever, you can still have someone, you know, come out stable and able to navigate their spirit and their soul, even when they were exposed to those things. And I had a lot of exposure to that. And I will say that that saving grace of a grandmother who, you know, was there for those foundational and formative years, you know, really impacted who I am today. But I got to see the negative influences, which was important for me to build that empathy and compassion toward, you know, my parents that are not perfect, right? But that lifelong connection, to be connected to my mother, even with the complex issues we deal with, is important to who I am, because I am her. She is me. And I would be wondering why, when I get crazy, where because I'm still connected to her, and I am very stable. So thank you for letting me expound on that.
No, thank you. Thank you for sharing. You know, you elevated a number of different poignant statements and areas of space. You know, we still yet know the degree of trauma that individuals experience and to the depth by which individuals experience trauma. And once again, culture, and also plays a role in how we approach trauma, how we deal with trauma. I've always said that I think that there's this national standard around the ACEs, but I think that there have always been Black ACEs, that adverse trauma for Black children was always a different space and a different dance for our children than others. And so I do believe that getting systems also to be open to look at the varying types of family, what could be denoted and identified as family. Some would say no. You got some jurisdictions that said no, unless they're biological, they've spent X amount of time, they have this level of influence, that's the only way we're going to consider them. Well, we know, I personally know that when I grew up, everybody on my block raised somebody else's child. Every house I could remember, I vividly remember, everybody raised somebody else's child. They weren't, some might have been cousins, distant cousins, some might have been Miss Johnson's wayward son who needed another type of support because Miss Johnson couldn't do it. But there was never a need for foster care. And so I'm like, those folks came out pretty good. There was a sense of community, a sense of connectedness. Angela, and then Ed Marine.
Thanks for that, Keith. That was that village, that village that raised kids. And I think, we saw that kind of disappear. I always say in my generation, having been a parent that was addicted to alcohol and drugs for multiple years, having lost my children to child welfare, I wanted to speak to Tiffany's comments about her nephews. I am so grateful to hear that. But I also had a similar experience, Tiffany, when I began this work. I was engaged by one of the very workers who determined her life goal at the time was that I would never get my children back. Yet she was the one who came back and engaged with me and got me involved in this work. And she's also that same person who, once I was engaged and began working with my state around family engagement and parent partnership during that time, my great nephew nearly went into care. And my niece called me and I got scared because I didn't think for a minute that I would be able to take that child. I'd already lost 6. It wasn't that I couldn't take him and care for him. I was afraid to even try, but I did it anyway because I'll be damned if one of our kids go back into the system. And I reached out to that very worker and she told me absolutely everything that I needed to do to go up there and get my nephew before they even went to court the next morning. So I went and picked him up and ended up raising that boy for the first 3 years of his life until his mother was able to get out of prison. So I know what God can do. And just to be sure, I submitted a document to the state to make sure that I wasn't on the list. And there was no record found. I lost 6 children and there was no record found. That says a lot. That says a lot about what God can do in your life. But the reality is this work is hard, but it's also hard work. And it's not for everybody. I believe that at some point, folks have to look individually and really begin to change their hearts, which leads to a mind shift around engaging families and youth and people with lived experience in child welfare. That, I believe, that's the strongest shift that needs to occur in order for folks to truly make it happen. We can continue working under the same racist constructs that these systems are built on. However, how are we as individuals going to move through them? As an individual person, how are you going to move through and promote and make change, even if it's a little bit of change? How are you going to move through these systems that we work in and promote that change for our children and families? Or stand on all the key terms you use around the experts and the lived experience expertise and all that. Either stand on that or stop saying it, because it's beginning to become offensive in some ways. But that's all I wanted to add to that. Tiffany, I'm so glad you were able to get your nephews safe with family. I know that even though they experienced that even that small experience had to still be traumatic for them. My great nephew didn't talk for the first 3 months that I had him, and he could talk, and he knew me. It wasn't like he didn't know me. And the day he started talking, he was so short and tiny. He was standing under my table and he was cussing and fighting. And I heard him from my room, and I went in there, and I was so excited because he was talking. It didn't register for me that he was cussing and he was fighting. And he was fighting the police officers that took his mother.
Wow. Thank you so much, Angela. Wow. It is going to be these types of sharing. And once again, this is, I tried to make very clear in our conference or whatever, this is not about the re-traumatization of individuals who have lived experiences, but it's about sharing their truth. And that truth for me is one of the greatest data points there is. And so it's that data points that's going to move hearts and to move minds. Ed Marine.
Hi, I don't know if I can share after Miss Braxton just shared. Thank you again for just, the experiences you've experienced and bring it to the forefront, right, to help us move in this process. I raised my hand because I was a bit disheartened based by what Tiffany was sharing when her 3 nephews were taken into protective custody. And the family was told they'll be placed in care for the next 3 days. Because first and foremost, when children are taken into protective custody, first and foremost is always to look at placing with relatives. So that's why I felt a bit disheartened by that. Usually, and the only way we know who the relatives are is for the parents to inform the social worker, right? Who's available, right, within the family. We know that sometimes parents will not inform social workers of relatives because of the shame, the guilt, the embarrassment, or whatever conflicts may be going on in families. So I'm glad to hear that eventually they did get to family members, Tiffany. But let's talk, because I want to know a little bit more about that situation. I'm taking it as a LA County situation. So let's talk. Because if there's an issue around training, maybe for that worker that gave that message that we can't place with family, then that's something that we can address on our end. So please I will look, I may still have your number. If it's the same, I may still have your number, Tiffany. So that's the piece I wanted to share. Always is first and foremost to ensure that we place with our family first.
No, yes to everything you just said. I'm gonna drop my number in the chat for you. Don't trip. We're gonna leave out of this connected, because to your point, 2 things. One, I'm out here in these streets as a whole consultant, I'm professional, got my status, and I want to get back over there and into our conversation about the academy and how I maybe can be of service. Because now we got 3 more kids, and I got to be able to pay for these 3 kids, right? Myself and my sister are going to step up. We're going to keep them with the family. We're going to do it together. And do it. I know that part of what I stood on, because I made my way up the channel, so I'm sitting talking to ARAs, ready to talk to RAs and everybody else. Part of what I gave grace for was the reality that there is no telling what my brother or this young lady is saying while they're in their process of their spiral and being flipped. And so my stance was, if you have concerns, let's air them out right now. We don't have over the weekend to wait for you to get back into the office, for you to bring these concerns to the light. We're not arguing that there might not be some concerns. We think we as family should have the right to know that. So it wasn't that. I think the priority was family, but the immediacy, the urgency of the immediate response. I think that we think, oh, it's just a couple of days. It's no big deal, right? We'll get to it on Monday. It's that energy. And there was somebody between all of the people that I talked to that had a chance to see, maybe for other people that's different, but you've already impacted my life. You already scarred them. We left my brother over there with y'all too long, in Sycamore and Ritalin and all of the different places they pushed him through, right? That's we don't have that. We're not on that type of time as a family, and we don't have that type of time. And to your point, I was once again charged up to say there's still more work to do, right?
Yes.
There's too many people who would have took those no for an answer. There's too many people who don't understand the hierarchy. There's too many people who can't text a former RA that used to run that whole office and say, hey, who over there? Who do I need to talk to? Right? They don't have those connections, those resources. They didn't speak at the BACW the week before to have that touch point, right? With somebody that would help them navigate that. What about those families? What about those children? So my concern is now beyond just my family. And I'm glad that we went through it, because now I'm able to see in real time where some of those holes are. So I'm very, I'm solution oriented, and I'm ready to get back up there anyway. And we got plenty to talk about. So yes, to that point, yes, to we'll make something magnificent out of this. But it was too traumatic. Like my stomach was at the bottom of my, it was too traumatic for nothing. And even for us, right? As the party's trying to get these kids. And then now these 3 children under 3, like we was rushing to have the reality of, and it's not like they're like, oh, let's do this, let's do that. So there's so much work to be done without getting into all the pieces of it. But your point is relevant. But LA County did a good job, right? But then there's still work to do, is what I want to say. Like, you know what I mean?
Because Tiffany, here's the deal. What you're saying is that 3 children were placed in out-of-home care that did not have to be placed in out-of-home care with non-related family members. They could have been placed with family members on a temporary emergent basis for that weekend, even for that weekend, right? They did not have to go with someone who was unrelated to them. And that's the piece that's really disheartening to me, which then says, yes, there's still a gap in the services we're providing families. Yeah. Because as you stated, yes, you were able to reach back and go, oh my gosh, that's this person who spoke last week. But again, what happens to the ones who are not a part of this larger space, right? So, yeah.
Right. So a couple of things. And I first want to give, I only have Nelson on the line. I don't have a first or first name. Nelson, would you like to add to the conversation or share anything? Okay, please take your time to do that. But the example that we just heard from Tiffany, you also heard, Angela's journey, I think leads us into that next step around evaluating, can triumph actually occur? Because if triumph can occur, the conditions are going to be that people's will have to change, have to shift. I mean, that was all really about will. Somebody had to take the time to listen to Tiffany, to be open to receive Tiffany's delivery, passion, however you want to describe it, but to be open and non-judgmental, to then be able to move their head space and their heart space to get this done. That requires a lot of energy and effort. What's easy is stay with the script, follow the standard rules. I don't care about what the other experiences or atmosphere looks like. It says this, here's the risk score, remove this child, period. That's the easy part. But in doing easy, you do harm. And so it's going to require that type of will shifting. People ask at times, sometimes you go to these conferences or leadership development, and they said, if you had a superpower, Keith, what would that be? And I said, I am will shifter. If I have superpower, I'll be will shifter. And so my responsibility is to attempt to shift people's will, because what you believe is going to drive your will, and your will is going to drive your practice. How you treat people, how you respond, all generates to what you believe and your will. So as we kind of come to a close and begin to wrap this up, let's talk about in your specific areas or sphere of influence, what will you do to help shift heart space and mindset?
Steve, can you repeat that question, please?
Sure. What will your efforts be, or what are your thoughts about how do we move forward in shifting people's heart space and mindset around the importance of looking deeper and expanding one's analysis about children, everything from safety to placement to how they treat, serve, and support African American children and families? Dr. Clark said, keep presenting divergent viewpoints. Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking in that, like the willingness to be vulnerable and to have those conversations that aren't, you know what I mean? And she put that in the chat. I'm like, yes, there's what we're used to talking about. There's what we're comfortable with talking about. And then there's the conversations that need to be had. And sometimes you don't want to be the one. But like I just learned at the conference, that is a form of leadership. Yeah. And that is an anointed position in this work. And somebody has to do it. So standing in those moments, speaking our truth, no matter what that looks like and how divergent it is to the norm, and being willing to catch fades when necessary, Keith. Like, we don't always ask for fights, and we just be trying to mind our business sometimes and live our best lives. But when them fades come, remembering how powerful we are, how connected we are, and that we don't have to be scared of this system anymore. We don't have to run from it. We can face it head on. So I appreciate you all of reminding me of that, of creating these opportunities for such discussion, and I look forward to the feedback from the rest of the group.
Excellent, Tiffany. Thank you.
I just wanted to share that I had the experience this past weekend of spending a day at the Black Family Empowerment Day in San Diego. I hope you don't mind, Dr. Keisha, me sharing that she facilitated a panel around family empowerment, and it was absolutely amazing. I appreciate her so much. I'm on a project that she's connected to as well, and I just appreciate her leadership and her the way that she speaks for us and stands up for us as Black people, and the way she supports lived experience in the way that she can, in the space that she's in. I appreciate you.
Great.
I'm going to continue to get up and show up in these spaces as often as I can, and look for every avenue to change hearts and minds. I just got off of a call this morning and with a similar conversation, and it's within, you know, an entire system that I work, and it's difficult, you know, and the struggle is real. However, I just have to keep showing up and not necessarily showing out, but I just feel like, you know, it's been a long time coming. I, you know, used drugs for a lot of years, and I had to transform my entire life. I mean, my entire life. And was able to do that when I believe that child welfare really thought that I would just lost all the kids, she'll go dope herself to death. But that's what caused my pivot, to be honest, because no, you're not going to throw me away and just be done with me. And so that's my get up and show up every day. in any space that'll have me. But we have all got to do better and look for ways to work within the systems we're in. But we need to also look for how are we supporting our people in the community and helping prevent them from coming in to the system. Because like I said, my faith in the system change, it's just not there. It's not there. I'm going to keep trying, but it's still not there. And really, all it needs is a shift. How many policies do people revise and recreate? Just start pinching away by starting with one that you're going to redo, revise with the voice of people like me and Tiff.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And
Ms. Braxton, social workers, I get it at the policy level, but at the end of the day, it's the social workers who are also out there in the field carrying out the daily task, right? They're the ones out there doing the investigation, assessments, et cetera. Social workers need to hear from those with lived experience like you, like Tiffany. They need to know more. So, and so for them to take to heart when they get trainings like fairness and equity that talks about the disproportionality of African-American children in the foster care system, they take that to heart, excuse me, and they make up in their mind to go out and do the best job possible. That when they go out and they're any homes they go in, regardless of ethnicity, but when they go out and they're doing the investigations with children of color, African-American children, that they're checking the biases at the door, right? Because Tiffany's experience recently, right? That worker did not walk through the process of I'm placing 3 boys, not with families, when there's family available. And I know within my department's policies and procedures, all I need to do is to run the CLETs, get that clearance, and I can place those children with their own family members. So I thank you so much, Ms. Braxton, from hearing from you. You always prove my point when I share, whether it's in the teaching realm or when in training of new social workers, that when someone is on substance use, and whether it's substance use, it could be DV, intimate partner violence, whatever the issue, they're not going to shift just because DCFS come in their life that day, right? So that we have to continuously to do that work with them, continuously do that work. Because at the end of the day, trauma doesn't begin, whether it's for the children or the parents, trauma doesn't start when DCFS come in the home. Trauma has already been there prior to children's services show up, but there's an added layer of trauma when children's services show up. So if you don't mind, if you could drop your information, if you have an email address, Ms. Braxton, I would appreciate it. Thank you so much, Mr. Keith.
No problem, no problem. Well, I want to just close by thanking you all for your attendance, your ongoing commitment to improving outcomes for African-American children, families, and communities, and your continued fight, and your continued showing up in the places and the spaces to be heard. Black administrators in child welfare are here as a support. We'll continue to, at times, be the sole or the only voice who are bold and courageous to have some of these conversations. And we thank you all for your support. So I'll give a couple of seconds. You saw some. You got Angela's information in the chat. Somebody wanted to pick that up. I think Tiffany's going to contact you, Ed Marine, on her number, and we're good to go. So we will look to hold more of these kinds of fireside chats in the future, but we will make sure that you're aware of them. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Keith. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks now.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon and the week, everyone.
You too.
too.
Bye-bye.